Buddy, welcome. Great to have so many people coming out to our groundwork call about organizing in the South and organizing in red states and organizing under hostile political conditions. Great to see so many folks. We'll get properly started in like 2 to 3 minutes. But while you're joining, if you want to just introduce yourself in the chat, share like what chapter you're from, and yeah, your name, pronouns, anything else that you want us to know about your organizing experience in the South, I think would be helpful so we kind of know who's in the room before we get going. I'm such a huge fan of the song choice, Jewel. Perfect way to kick off the Zoom. Sweet, awesome. Great to see you, Steven. Good to have a convention delegate. Amazing. Daniel founded the first chartered YDSA in Kentucky. Also very cool. Yeah, I have a feeling we're going to have a lot of folks on who have a ton of experience organizing for socialism in red states. So very excited for this discussion. And yeah, we'll get started in like a minute or two. Nice. Okay, Knoxville. Fantastic. Yeah, welcome, Stella. Great to have you. All right, a few more people are joining. We'll get started in about a minute, but if you want to just introduce yourself in the chat in the meantime, share your names, your pronouns, what chapter you're in. Also, if there's anything in particular, like experience you have organizing in the South or in red states, we definitely want to hear about that too. So feel free to share that in the chat as well. Oh, Corey, I didn't know you were from Oklahoma. Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. We got two Oklahomans on this call that we know of, that we're aware of.
We're everywhere secretly.
All right, welcome. Awesome. We have some Florida folks. Yeah, if you haven't yet, definitely feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Share your name, your pronoun, what chapter you're in, any experience that you have organizing in the South, definitely feel free to share. Awesome. Membership coordinator for Tampa DSA. Oh, El Paso. I'm gonna be there in like a week. Very cool. Okay, and welcome, Trey. All right, so it's a few minutes after the hour. I think we'll go ahead and just jump in and get started. So hey everybody, my name is Frances, she, her, and I'm in Los Angeles DSA, but I first got involved in DSA in New Orleans when I was living in Louisiana, and founded the chapter there. So yeah, really excited to have so many folks on this call and for a really generative discussion today. I think there's a lot that we will have to talk about. So just to kind of kick things off, we are hosting this call as Groundwork. We're the Groundwork Caucus. We are a DSA caucus that is running candidates for the National Political Committee this year. We're running 8 awesome candidates from chapters all across the country and from different organizing backgrounds. And we're all really united in our vision of building a DSA that works for all, a DSA that works for all members, that works for all chapters in all organizing conditions, to build the party that fights for the working class and that really fights back against fascism and right-wing extremism and fights for working people. So this panel is part of a series of webinars that we've done and that we're doing in the lead up to convention. We did one last week or the week before about eco-socialism. We're going to do one later this week actually about the response to the ICE raids in Los Angeles and how that ties into just multiracial organizing in DSA in general. And, we are hoping to just have a series of webinars that really do a deep dive into our politics as Groundwork and our vision for DSA. As we were kind of organizing that, we realized that a majority of our slate actually has significant experience organizing for socialism in the South. And we wanted to really look at those experiences together and see how that shapes our politics within DSA, and our politics of how we see the fight for socialism. carrying out. And so we realized that we have a bunch of folks that have deep like ties to the South. I mentioned I lived in New Orleans for 5 years and founded the DSA chapter there and chaired that chapter for a year also. And then additionally, Ashik is on our slate from Wilmington, North Carolina, Sumter from Atlanta, Carl from Oklahoma. Today we also have a panelist from Richmond. I'm going to let them all introduce themselves, but yeah, we have a wide variety of Southern organizing experiences and just living experiences. So wanted to kind of get on a call and talk through some of this and see how it shapes groundwork politics and also how it drives our vision for what we believe and know that DSA can be. So with that, I'm going to jump into just panelist introductions and I'll start with Carl, if you want to jump in and introduce yourself.
Hi everybody, my name is Carl, he, him. I have mainly organized with Metro DC DSA, but my first chapter and a chapter that is really close to my heart was Green Country DSA. That was the Tulsa chapter before it went defunct. And I did electoral work, some labor support work there, and also a little bit of tenant organizing with them back from like 2019 to 2021. But I also have led Metro DC DSA as well. And yeah, just very excited to talk about how we can win in a place that's very important to my heart, where I'm from, and think that we can win into. And maybe then I can just pass it over to Sumter.
Thanks, Carl. Yeah, hey everyone. My name is Sumter. I use they or he pronouns, and I'm from Atlanta, DSA, where I've spent the entirety of my DSA, my time in DSA, I guess. And so I joined DSA in 2018. I got involved in the YDSA chapter at Georgia Tech, so I have some experience with campus organizing in the South. And since then, I helped kind of revitalize our chapter in late 2019, just before the COVID pandemic, and help it weather the storm. And now we've been growing, running candidates. It's very exciting, even in more like the suburban area where the working class is not so obviously urban liberal elites or whatever you have. So we've got a lot of experience winning in different terrains in Georgia, including in electoral races as well as union work all across the state. I helped organize some statewide calls as well, with chapters and organizers all across Georgia. But mostly my work has been in labor and administrative stuff, helping keep our chapter stable. Let's go to Sean.
Hi, my name is Sean. I use he, him pronouns. I've been in Richmond DSA for 5 years now, where I've been on the steering committee as the membership secretary, chairing the labor committee, now the tech committee as well. And so we got a lot of stuff going. We've grown about 600% since I joined the chapter, which has been fantastic to watch. Um, and we've sort of done that through, a lot of labor organizing. I know we're going to talk about this later, but yeah, a lot of my experience has been in labor organizing. We just started an EWalk chapter here. And we've helped, all sorts of union drives across the state. And we've done lots of housing organizing, and we're getting our feet wet in some eco-socialism work as well.
Awesome. Yeah. And also just to give a little bit of my background, I mentioned that I was the chair of the New Orleans DSA chapter and lived in Louisiana for 5 years. And while I was there, we did I would say I mean we did a whole bunch of stuff, but just like a few different campaigns that I think are highlights from my time there is we did a campaign to stop the defunding of the public library system. Then that was successful. We also started the first ever brake light clinics in DSA and did a bunch of projects along that line. And we also, yeah, ran a candidate for agricultural commissioner for a Louisiana statewide office. So kind of ran the gamut of like just experimenting and trying creative things in hostile political conditions. Um, so yeah, we're really excited for this panel today. We're gonna just start with Sean is gonna talk a little bit about growing his chapter, growing Richmond TSA, and then we'll also have a little overview of some of the groundwork resolutions, and then we'll do some discussion questions and some audience Q&A. But I'll pass it to Sean to talk next.
Great. As I kind of gave a little bit in the intro, we've been growing a lot, and that is very much due to the hard work of our entire chapter. Our members have definitely stepped up. And, when I joined the chapter, we were in like that COVID or just, 2021, 2022 slump of getting, 3 people at a meeting. Um, and it took a lot of reflection to get us out of that. And that reflection was around what completely reorienting our chapter strategy. So for a while, our chapter was very much situated of, we're just going to put out a statement and hope people come join in on, us talking about various issues in the area and not necessarily doing a lot about them. And uh, a new group, some fresh blood joined the chapter all at the same time. And we kind of were thinking, we are like, well, I don't really want to go to a general body meeting and just talk. I want to, there's a lot of stuff going on. The city workers are organizing, the teachers are organizing, the Nabisco plants on strike, and Starbucks was organizing all at the same time. And so we were kind of figuring out where we needed to situate ourselves to kind of get in on that work. And as we kind of write in an article that I post, me and a comrade posted on the Groundwork blog, is that this is sort of when we began our base building era, I guess, because in the South, and especially in small chapters, you're not going to have structures in place that you can kind of naturally go to in order to uplift the chapter work. Our union density in Richmond is still only 3% or just over 3%. The average in Virginia is 4%. The average in America is near 10. And so we still have right to work. There's, a lacking in worker protections and tenant protections. And so there's just, and there's historical reasons for that, as I'm sure anyone of the other Southern organizers here could tell you. And so we figured the best way to sort of combat all of this and situate ourselves to kind of do larger work that we were seeing in, New York and DC, was to help build those structures. And so any union thing going on, whether that was a picket or a union drive or the development of the Southern Workers Assembly in Richmond, we were there. And we put ourselves there, and we helped as much as we can to uplift their goals as well as ours, because we knew by helping uplift their goals, it would inherently help ours. And we helped organize. I think we're at every Starbucks now in Richmond. Our teachers are organized, our city workers are organized. All of those campaigns I mentioned all succeeded. And it's really changed the way that we can operate. So now that we have that base, we moved on to, okay, we have all of these connections. There's work going on now that these structures are sort of in place, and we need to develop a sustainable way to engage in these. And so with anyone that's done labor work in a small chapter, it is very up and down, right? There's not a lot going on in between drives. And so we decided to learn about campaigns. We asked a national organizer to come down and teach us what that meant, because again, we were doing really good work. We were building a lot of bonds, but membership was again beginning to wane after a year or so. And so she came down, she walked us through how to build a campaign, what the goals of a campaign are, and how to do, power mapping and all that. And we immediately switched over to sort of orienting our work that way, and it has exploded our chapter. We could not have done probably a lot of what we've done without the kind of work we put in and building the relationships, the coalitions we built over the years. But definitely the ceasefire campaign we did and the housing campaign we're currently doing is definitely getting members more involved, upskilling our members, making sure that they feel like they're owning the work we're doing, and making sure that, we're winning, and we are winning. It's also through that work that we've sort of built an understanding of our terrain, and we were able to actually move into realms that we never once thought possible, and that being the electoral arena. Because in Virginia, as I'm sure we're not alone, we have what's called the Dillon Rule, which means cities can't decide anything unless the state says so. And so we are very limited in the terrain we have. And so something as simple as the city council or the school board can be a huge obstacle, because they'll say they don't have the power even though they do. And, a lot of people just believe it. And so through other campaigns, we were able to target and sort of do like a analysis on every single person on the school board and the city council and determine where the weakest seats were. And through those connections and the coalitions, we met Kenya Gibson, who is already running in the 3rd district, and she is a huge union ally. She drafted the resolution that allowed the teachers union to actually collectively bargain. She then pushed for them to actually get those rights. She was very, foundational to that sort of side of the aisle. And so we met with her, we talked to her, we told her, we're willing to kind of have conversations about, the things we want done, as well as you, and try to see where we could go. And yeah, she ended up winning by almost 10%. We knocked 4,000 doors for her. She's pushed all sorts of stuff in front of city council that would never have been possible. She's committed to pushing ceasefire and divestment resolution forward. She's actually pushed forward rental inspection. She got a bunch of stuff passed in the budget. And so, we're definitely moving in the fast lane now. And it's sort of all of this model that we've kind of developed of like base build campaigns in order to, cycle back to the base building, but also move everything forward and just kind of repeat and repeat and repeat. And it's been really great. And I hope that Dan T in the chat is Dan Taylor. Uh, but hey, what's going on, man? He used to be in Richmond, USA. So, yeah, that's sort of the model we kind of followed, and I really hope that, others can find success there.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Yeah, we're gonna do some time for like audience Q&A at the end. I'm sure that folks have like responses or questions for Sean and what y'all built in Richmond. And we'll definitely save some time at the end for Q&A. I'm gonna jump us forward though and talk a little bit about some of the groundwork proposals that we have at convention this year. So I'm gonna drop in the chat a link to all of the things that we're proposing at convention this year, all of our resolutions. But there's a few things that I want to highlight that I think are particularly relevant to our conversation today. So the first one is our Fight Fascism, Build Socialism campaign. And basically what this says is that we as an organization should prioritize the fight against fascism and the fight against the Trump administration, and really work to be the leaders in that fight, as we know that socialists have to be the leaders because the Democratic Party and the centrist Democrats are never, ever, ever going to do what needs to be done in order to really fight back against like a hostile government. So we know that socialists have to be in the driver's seat on that, and we want our organization to really prioritize that and to resource that campaign and to fight really effectively and to do it as a collective nationally together, instead of kind of piecemeal across like different committees and different chapters, et cetera. So we really want to try to unify and be leaders in the fight against fascism and the fight against this rising, all this horrible stuff that's happening right now. And so the Fight Fascism, Build Socialism campaign, I think it's really important for us on a national level, but also, of course, for our comrades in red states or in more hostile political environments. So that's one that I really want to highlight, and I hope folks will check it out, and would definitely want to like hear how people kind of respond to it and are thinking about it. The other one that I want to highlight is the 50 state strategy proposal. This one is pretty straightforward. It basically just says that we should prioritize forming statewide organizations. So across the org, across DSA, we've had different experiments with statewide formations. Sometimes it's like one chapter that covers a whole state, such as Connecticut or Maine. Sometimes in the case of California, we have kind of a statewide organization that the different chapter locals can like are send delegates to and can inform the work of, but it's like an umbrella organization for the chapters. And so there's different ways of approaching it, but we feel that there's a necessity to try to organize on a statewide level, and to really figure out how we can stop like reinventing the wheel where people are in, in small towns or in rural areas and trying to form a new chapter and having to do all this administrative legwork and then finding that it falls through because it's just a lot to maintain. Whereas if there's an existing statewide infrastructure that people can plug into and be like a branch of that statewide chapter, it can be a little bit easier to just sustain the organizing and to sustain the organization. So that's 50 state strategy. And so I hope they'll also check that one out. And then I also just want to highlight the one member, one vote proposals. So one member, one vote, we have a few different proposals that are relevant to it. But the broad strokes and the big idea of all the one member, one vote proposals are that there's a big disconnect between what happens at the national level of the organization and what happens in chapters at the local level. And that disconnect creates all kinds of challenges for us. So it creates challenges locally where it's hard to get plugged into the right resources, or you don't know necessarily like where to look to get support for XYZ issue in your chapter. And that creates challenges. And then additionally, it creates problems on the national level where we really need to be fighting on a national level and fighting back on a national level, but we struggle to operate with real like unity and to have like a clear collective vision of what needs to happen. And so there's a number of things that kind of drive that, but I think what we propose is that one part of what drives that is that members are really disconnected from the decision making that happens at the national level. So, with the NPC, if you aren't already in a caucus or plugged in like to that sort of side of DSA, it's really hard to know just like what's going on, and what decisions are being made and how are they going to affect me as a chapter leader. And so we want to find ways for rank and file DSA members to have direct input on what's happening at the national level. And so our one member, one vote proposals are ways of trying to tackle that. So direct elections for our NPC members instead of having delegated elections. And then also, if we're going to make an endorsement at the federal level, we should decide it together, right? We should have a membership vote on whether we're going to endorse that candidate. That's how we do it at the chapter level. Why don't we have those same standards for our national organization? So we propose that some of those resolutions can kind of break down some of these silos and help the national org be a more effective tool for operating collectively and for supporting chapters all across the country, whether you're in a red state or blue state or purple state or what. And so those are some of the things that we're proposing at convention. But with that, I'm gonna just hop into our panel discussion. And we have a couple question prompts for our panelists. So I'm gonna just start with the first one, which is, what are the challenges that socialist organizers face in red states and what are the opportunities? Any panelists want to kick us off?
I guess coming from Georgia, maybe the archetype of a state that, the majority of our population did not vote for Donald Trump in the previous election, but our state legislatures are still both supermajority Republican, right? And so that right there presents the first challenge, which is people, I think, have a lot of assumptions about, the makeup of the population in this country and where different people's politics lie. But the reality is that popular working class politics are popular no matter where you're going. And there are young people in the South. There are queer folks in the South. There's a huge amount of racial diversity in the South. There are immigrants from all over the world. It's just the same as any other place in America. But I think one of the key differences is because of the long history of segregation and the specific ways that capital is accumulated in the South, it's meant that there's a lot of structural power in those old boys clubs. And that has perpetuated to the modern day. I know that Virginia and North Carolina and Florida also experience this sort of thing. States all over the South experience this sort of thing where the will of the majority of our population is not really represented by our state governments. However, what can you do, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's ready and willing right now to stand up and change things. It takes a long, hard fight. And so coming from Atlanta, we're kind of the stereotype of a blue island in a Red Sea. we have a lot of progressive folks in our city, a lot of young people who believe very strongly and get very energized when they see people like Zoran Mamdani win. We had a large number of people voting for Bernie before COVID. So, the population is here, the appetite for those kind of politics are here, but there's so many structural constraints. Now, for me, speaking from Atlanta, one of the biggest constraints is just how spread out everything is. This was on purpose, in the wake of Reconstruction of the Civil War and all that. Our cities were designed to be built differently than those in the North or those on the West Coast because they wanted to be very spread out. They were designed to be more like logistical hubs rather than, the old style of industrial city planning that was more present elsewhere in the country, and that presents a lot of barriers because people are so spread out. I think about when BCTGM went on strike a couple years ago, the Nabisco and Mondelez workers. We had to drive out over an hour from our city center out to Norcross for the picket line, and I can describe the picket line for you. There was a warehouse with about probably 15 or 20 truck bays in it. And right across the street, there was a wall of trees behind which was an apartment block, and there was nothing on either side. So that was the only thing on this road for about half a mile in either direction, right? How do people interact with each other if they're not walking along the street? How do people feel that sense of solidarity? That's a huge barrier, just kind of baseline to organizing in the South. Right. And so what that means is we need to pick our campaigns very carefully. We need to make sure that when we are going out and campaigning and talking to people, we're doing so with a mind that like the lives they're living can be really divorced from each other, even if they're experiencing the same thing, right? You can have people in an apartment block who work at different places, they never talk to each other, but they could be next door neighbors, right? So you really need to be very patient and discuss with people to figure out what their issues are. It takes a long time to build up those organizing habits, but we need to be really disciplined and we need to be very targeted in the way that we approach them. But we've seen that approach is successful. We were able to recruit some of the BCTGM workers to DSA. They've thanked us a lot for our efforts going out to support them on the picket line. The same thing has happened with Teamsters an hour and a half south of Atlanta, or even an hour and a half north of Atlanta, right? Our metro area is spread out all over the place. We've even seen this with our electoral victories. Gabriel Sanchez, the first Democratic Socialist legislator in Georgia since Julian Bond, right, back in the day. He won in Smyrna, which was 45 minutes from where I live, by car around an interstate. It's very spread out, but we were able to identify that target and we were able to identify supporters in the district and base build very heavily. And we were able to do it because we understood the contours that allowed us to actually talk to people quickly and build up a base of people to support it. The appetite is there. The real question is how you connect people's experiences, which are often really atomized, especially in the South, to that broader message.
Thanks, Sumter. Yeah, Carl, go for it.
Yeah, maybe to go off that a bit too. Something that I think is important about organizing in red states as well is precisely that appetite question, right? There's a lot of times, and like I know this from organizing in Oklahoma, there's really not like always something that can capture and direct that energy in a really effective way, right? And to me, that actually is a really great opportunity for DSA. It's very different from my organizing up here in the DMV in and around DC, where you have a super strong Democratic Party, and a lot of people that we'd want to recruit into our organization have that long-standing familial relationship with the Democratic Party, and that's something we have to break and fight to get over, right? And a lot of times that's just not as present. So when we can show up and we can be the force that says, hey, you have these politics, you're out here protesting Trump in Tulsa, Oklahoma, like the most right-wing metro of over 1 million people in the country, you don't necessarily have that political home in the same way. And we can be the people that show up and then cohere that and get people to see things politically instead of just seeing, something as a one-off issue or understanding themselves not as political operatives or not as workers, right? But as some kind of other identity that might get in the way of seeing their class interests. And I think when we can do that, actually, we can win really surprising stuff in the South too. The first non-binary state legislator in the country's history was elected in Oklahoma City, right? And Oklahoma City is more progressive than you think, but it's still in Oklahoma, right? And they were able to do that because Maury Turner is their name, ran on a clear values-based campaign, right? It's the same thing that we see too with a lot of the times what you see in Missouri, what you've seen in Oklahoma, Kansas, or ballot initiatives for things that we agree with can do really well, because people do agree with like a lot of our fundamental politics. And the question is just, how do we create those opportunities to be out in the community, to be showing up in solidarity with people and convincing them that, hey, yeah, you believe in abortion, you're a Kansas voter, one of the reddest states in the union, but you believe in this, you're willing to show up and fight for this. And that's part of a broader package of things, right? When we can identify those specific instances and then go in on that, we can actually do a lot more, I think, than we can other places. And we can have bigger opportunities by organizing in red states too, right? Because we're not necessarily fighting against the same thing. We're just fighting against Republicans. That's awesome. That's a much better train for us because they hate working people. And so our message can land a lot stronger, and we can create a lot of a really good difference there.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on. I mean, I think you guys have covered everything really well that I had on my notes. I don't know if you're reading my screen or something, but um, I think one thing too that is a challenge is sort of this pessimism that I think that a lot of people get when organizing in the South. I'm in Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy, and our history is very much out in the open. Um, and so, I mean, I think it was like 2 years ago they just took down the last Confederate statue. And there's still plaques, roads, schools, bridges, everything still, glorifying the Confederacy. And I think when you're organizing around that, it's really easy to be like, well, that's not possible. Or no one agrees with us on X, Y, and Z. And I think that it is extremely important to understand the history, especially not just the old history, but also the newer history, kind of what Sumter was talking about understanding people's actual issues in your area, and sort of how the decisions that the old history made around urban planning, around segregation. I mean, Richmond is extremely segregated still, and kind of how those have an effect on today. And instead of looking at that as, wow, we have so much working against us, but instead trying to figure out what that means in terms of how you need to shape your campaigns, what you need to attack, how you need to be strategic and in order to overcome.
Yeah, totally. And I think something that you said, Carl, about creating opportunities to break down the atomization that like Sumter was talking about, it really made me think about when we were doing the brake light clinics in New Orleans. Like at the time it was it was very like DSA controversial. Everyone's like brake light clinics, like it's not real political work, it's not a campaign, and it's totally correct that it is not enough. Like it's not enough to just do a mutual aid project. But if you do skip the base building step that like Sean was talking about earlier, you can set yourself up for failure later on. And I think just having those opportunities to have conversations, like people pull in to get their brake light change, and then you're talking to them about socialism, like that is a really tangible material thing that can help build power in the long run. So yeah, that just made me think of that, and I wanted to add. Um, but then for the next question, we're gonna talk a little bit specifically about the resolutions too for that Groundwork's putting forward for convention. So how does the 50 state strategy help Texas or red states, other states where we can't accomplish things at the state legislature? And also with one member, one vote, sometimes chapters or members feel like the NPC only listens to large chapters or to caucuses. How would one member, one vote help us feel more listened to or less?
Maybe I can start a little bit here too, specifically on the 50 state strategy. Something that I think about a lot is how like the first chapter, I was a member of Tulsa DSA. We had a smaller base of people than a lot of other chapters, and so we ended up doing a lot of work that's just kind of like keeping the lights on, running stuff so that we could have meetings, that kind of stuff. And how the 50 state strategy resolution is set up, if there was some kind of um, broader statewide organization or like an umbrella organization that we would have been under, it might have actually been helpful between Tulsa DSA and Oklahoma City DSA to split some of that administrative work and make it easier for us to have the basic stuff done so that we could do the stuff that we needed to do to get to where we could maybe run some of that in-house more, right? Like up here in Metro DC, we have a really big administrative committee. We're the third largest chapter in the country. We can devote a lot of organizing time to the internal stuff that makes things work. But that can be a lot harder to do with smaller chapters. And you're going to grow by having the outward facing work, by having the work that gets you in front of people, that does that base building, that wins for working people so that they see there's a value in being in DSA, right? That sees that at a minimum DSA is showing up. And so like being able to split some of that work up just on a basic level, I think actually would have helped keep that chapter around. And so that's something that's really important to me. But the other thing too is that I think a lot with one member, one vote for smaller chapters or chapters in states where you can't affect what's necessarily going on in your state legislature, like Sumter was saying, with supermajority Republican control. Politics happens at the national level too, right? And we also all as socialists need to be thinking about that, right? Like the fact that Donald Trump is president has a very bad effect on working people everywhere in the country. And so being able to make those decisions at the levels where the bosses are making decisions, where the owning class, the capitalists are making decisions, is actually really important. And spreading out that power, I think, will help make people feel more bought into DSA more broadly, but also hopefully experience some power too that comes from being active at the national level.
Yeah, kind of want to just repeat a lot of what you just said. I think I'll start with the 50 state strategy. I think that is really helpful, or would have been really helpful in hindsight, looking back when we were, three people at a meeting. We put a lot of investment in sort of the keep the lights on work, and that pulled a lot of our early on capacity into that, which is not what grew the chapter. I mean, I love my membership spreadsheet. I think it's very cool, but no one, being able to contact our members only slightly helped people come to things. It was the actual work we were doing, it was the organizing we were doing, it was the talking to our neighbors we were doing. And I think having sort of that, umbrella organization to sort of help with a lot of that work would, accomplish a lot, especially looking at other chapters in Virginia, where I see a lot of the same issues around capacity and having to manage and prioritize. Do we have people focus on maybe building a website or comms or whatever, and versus, actual work in our neighborhoods. As far as one member, one vote goes, as we kind of mentioned in the article a little bit, a lot of when we were on that smaller size, a lot of our time and capacity was spent arguing about things that were happening at the national level that we had no control over. And I think when you're so small and you are fighting for capacity here and there, it's really easy to get caught up in sort of these debates that at the end of the day, no one on either side of the debate in the chapter has any sort of say right now, at least at the time, in how the decisions are made. And so I do think opening up one member, one vote, especially for smaller chapters, would be very beneficial, because it would sort of lighten the burden or load on sort of those conversations and allow us to focus on what's actually happening instead of complaining that we don't have any power.
Yeah, for my part, the 50 state strategy has been elaborated on, and we've tried to implement something similarly in Atlanta as well, with supporting smaller chapters that build up. But the problem is, right, we didn't necessarily have the infrastructure or guidance to properly support those chapters, and now we've had small city chapters, Augusta, Columbus, Middle Georgia, that have popped up and died and popped up and died, and it's just been a cycle, right? And we want to end that cycle. As far as one member, one vote goes, I think there are kind of three main arguments from my perspective that really go the hardest. And number one is in the South, right? There's a huge emphasis on voting rights because those continually get stripped away from us. Having an organization that can credibly claim that any member can come in and have an opinion about and influence our national strategy and our national leadership would be a huge recruitment tool, first of all. Second of all, requiring our national leadership to actually come and talk to our chapters. Like Atlanta is the 10th biggest chapter in the country, but to my knowledge, we've only had maybe two people from the NPC come in the last 5 years, right? One of them was Ashik, who came to our chapter convention, and the other one was a couple of years ago coming to talk about a trip to Venezuela, right? So actually making sure, like I see this all the time in Teamsters and in UAW. Now that one member, one vote has happened in those unions, they need to actually come and talk to the people on the ground in order to get their votes and understand what's happening locally and explain how that relates nationally. And I think the third argument is that it would enhance the level of strategic discussion across the whole organization, because what we have is members needing to become educated and involved about the details of our national strategy and actually engage in discussion and deliberation about, well, who's got the best plan to actually enact this, who's got the best plan to make sure our organization grows, and who can we trust to actually carry out what we are doing locally and support our work. And on top of that, can we actually meet these people face to face? You know, a lot of people in DSA don't even know what the NPC stands for, let alone who's on it. And if an NPC member is there, shaking hands and talking to people and listening to them, it's more likely that people will actually have access to our national leadership. And speaking of national leadership, I do see we have Ashik on now, so maybe highlight him real quick. I don't know if you've got an introduction for us.
Welcome, Ashik. Ashik is our national co-chair, and also is located in Wilmington, North Carolina. So thanks for being able to join and hop in, Ashik.
Yeah, very glad to join. Hey everyone. So yeah, this topic is something that I've thought a lot about over the past couple of years. I've been in national leadership since 2021, and I started in DSA in the DC chapter, where I joined in January 2017 when Trump got elected the first time. And then through the pandemic, I moved to Wilmington, North Carolina, which is on the coast of North Carolina. For those who don't know, sometimes I like to joke that it's the Florida of North Carolina. It's like in the southeast, it's, a coastal city. A lot of people, there's a lot of tourism, a lot of, like seasonal aspects to the economy. And especially moving here through the pandemic, I really saw, so it's a city of maybe 100,000 people, like living in the urban area proper, but then a bigger like metro area. And it's a city that I think is one of the fastest growing cities in the country right now, especially through the pandemic. And the pandemic itself was a time where a lot of people just like it accelerated a trend that's been happening for years and decades in the country, which is that there's a lot of internal migration happening across the United States for a lot of reasons, because of gentrification and in the most expensive, largest cities. I was born and raised in New York City, which is a city, there's the reasons Zoran got elected, because he's been campaigning on these cost of living issues, including like rent going up everywhere. That's the same thing in like in the biggest cities in the country, and it's increasingly the case in smaller cities like Wilmington, where a lot of people are moving from places like New York or Atlanta or like other cities in the region. So this is a trend like in smaller cities across the South, across the Midwest, and increasingly like I just see the same patterns like in all the DSA chapters that I've been visiting for the past year and a half as co-chair, like parts of the country that I've never been to before. I went to Texas for the first time last year, and I was really struck by, seeing all these new housing developments, like these, luxury condos that are not really that affordable for most people, or maybe they're meant to be affordable, but they're just driving up the cost of living in those places, and they look the same as what I see on the waterfront in Wilmington. They look the same as what I see in, like hipster neighborhoods in Brooklyn or in LA or Detroit. So like capital is behaving the same way more and more in cities of all sizes, including smaller ones, including and especially in the South. And, like with the rise of the second Trump administration, with the rise of fascists around the country, like it just seems like there are similar conditions everywhere, and capitalists like fascists are doing that. They have the same, very similar playbook. So it really seems to me like the left, needs to consolidate our own playbook. And we see that working across chapters. So you're hearing from like Sumter in Atlanta, Kara, who couldn't make it on tonight, is from Louisville, Kentucky. These are both cities in the South that have now elected socialists to local government. They have strong labor organizing programs where, we're not recommending that all chapters just focus on electoral work or make that their primary focus. But in chapters that have done it, it's because they've had other forms of organizing, like especially labor organizing in a lot of chapters in the South. Like Sean can say so much more about Richmond's experience. Like just having clear priorities, especially around labor and just clear campaign work, helps build the base for so much else that we need to do everywhere. Like Zoran Mamdani's win is so exciting in New York, and there are other examples like Omar Fateh in Minneapolis, but these strategies don't only apply to cities in on the coast or, upper Midwest. They can happen everywhere. And the steps to take are, like we think in Groundwork, increasingly the same everywhere. So that doesn't have to mean total cookie cutter, like checklist organizing, but we have enough lessons learned at this point that we can really build up chapters of like across the board, and especially in the South, we can't leave anything on the table to build power.
Yeah, hell yeah. And that's a great segue, Ashik, to our last question. And then we have about 5 more minutes before we do just audience Q&A. But yeah, I mean, there's so much that we can learn from each other across organizing contexts. But how does DSA organizing differ from red states to blue states? And what do we have in common across these organizing contexts that we can really like learn from each other no matter where we're organizing?
I'll go very briefly and just say we have the same responsibility to win. And actually, I would argue it's even more important for us to win in the South than it is to win elsewhere, or in red states, I guess, than to win elsewhere, because people need to see that not only can we elect someone, not only can we run campaigns and be organized, but we can actually beat them at their own game. And in other cities, there's the possibility, the hint of a hope for progressive reform, but in red states that is often squashed from the beginning, aborted, if you will. And we need to show that's not the case, right? That's not a de facto truth of living here, but in fact, a different world is possible.
Really briefly too. One of the things that I've noticed organizing in a very blue state, DC, versus organizing in a super red one is that the capitalist class is organized everywhere, and it doesn't matter which party is in control. They're going to have relationships with people who are in office, and the only way that we can fight that is through electing people and cutting off that relationship, and electing people that have left labor support. And that's something that you can build everywhere, because everywhere in this country, workers are a majority. We just have to show up, put the work in, and then we can take down the capitalists who are going to work with the people who are in power, unless they have the anchor through DSA, through like a proper like working class political organization, to say no to capital. It's just like Ashik said, they're building the same buildings everywhere, and they're trying to elect the same politicians everywhere. And so we have to win everywhere too.
Beautifully put, Carl. We have to. Um, Yeah, well, we do have a couple more minutes. We can pivot to audience Q&A, but if Sean or Ashik, if you had anything else that you want to add, please definitely feel free to jump in.
I guess maybe let me tee y'all up for this one and say, we just said we need to win, but maybe y'all can share a little bit more about how we win in Southern situations. I would say the number one thing is to focus on labor. We've seen in Minnesota and others, or sorry, Montana and other states like that, that labor is more powerful than the Republican organized, entrenched interests. They've defeated anti-labor bills. They've defeated anti-immigrant and these socially caustic ideas like that target trans people and racial minorities, just from the power of organized labor, right? And unions are something we can build everywhere in this country. I would say if there's a path to victory, that is it. It's got to be through organized labor.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can't stress that enough. I mean, that was what we did for 2, 3 years before we went to anything else. And even now it's helped us in every other, struggle we've gone through, is being able to just call up, someone we worked on a campaign with the Teamsters or the SEIU or IAM, and just be able to rely on them to kind of come out and boost what we're doing, because we do the same for them. And I can't stress that enough as far as like a stable base. It doesn't matter how people vote. Most people here are working class, and most people have atrocious working conditions in the South, right? I mean, every single Southern state has right to work, so, and low union density. And so I think everyone feels the same sort of struggle, and that's definitely something everyone can kind of rally around.
Yeah, and I just want to add, like, I said a bit about how I see conditions being increasingly the same, like all over the country. Like I this is something that, maybe is still contested, or like I haven't tested out this idea enough in DSA, but my feeling after visiting a lot of the country is that increasingly a socialist politics in the 21st century is like increasingly in urban politics, just like because that's just a major trend like across the country and around the world. Like more rural areas are depopulating, or people are moving into cities. Like I see, like I mentioned, Wilmington, where I live now, where this city has been a pretty small, but it's growing really fast. There are all these cross pressures where people are getting priced out or pushed out of bigger cities that they've lived in, because of the climate crisis. People are being pushed away from, if they live on the coast, if they live in areas prone to wildfire, like the climate crisis itself is accelerating, like a new like Great Migration. Like the Great Migration happened like in the late 19th century, early 20th century, where many, especially Black people, moved from the South into like northern cities or Midwest. That just is happening again. There's all this internal displacement happening. So I think we're leaving a lot on the table if we're not contesting like urban politics everywhere, and increasingly that's where working class people are. Um, so, like I think we're pretty open, like I'm pretty open personally to, ideas about how to organize in rural areas or like areas that are less densely populated. But it just seems to me like DSA's membership base is mostly, pretty concentrated in bigger cities or like urbanizing areas like Wilmington, which is a smaller chapter in the South, but like other DSA chapters I can think of have at least, a few like big town concentrations, even if people are spread out. So yeah, that like I was really inspired by the thinker Mike Davis, who was eco-socialist communist who passed away a few years ago, who had an essay called like "Who Will Build the Ark?" This is in like before 2012, and it's about how socialists need to really seriously consider like the rapid urbanization of all humanity, and I think that especially applies to parts of the country like the South. So yeah, like cities are causing a lot of problems, but also we can solve a lot of them by building like working class cities to be livable.
I want to, I don't know if challenge is the right word, but stretch that thought a little bit because one thing I've noticed in at least in Richmond and Sumter, I know you kind of talked about something a little bit in Atlanta, where it's like I don't necessarily think it is like rural and urban organizing because at the end of the day, at least in the South, the rural areas are very much serviced by the urban areas. Whereas where like, we have to drive an hour or so to most picket lines. There is literally just factories and like apartments right across from them, and that's where those people work. But the people that do the maintenance, the people that build those, the people that maybe put improvements in or whatever, those people are most likely, electricians coming from IBW 666 in Richmond. Um, and so, and there's, data centers going up all around Richmond and the rural areas, and those are being built by, again, IBW 666, and as well as the carpenters and all that who are in Richmond. And so the way that I think about rural organizing isn't necessarily like we need to spin up a branch out in, Hanover County or something or Ashland, but more so that um, through labor and housing, we can reach the rural communities and kind of bring them into sort of cohesion with the avenues that we are already building power in.
And maybe with that, I know we've only got like a couple minutes left, but maybe we can like grab one or two questions from the audience. If somebody just wants to hop on, and, like drop a question in the chat, we can try and maybe go through and answer one or two questions. And that's also, I mean, I think we've covered a ton of stuff here too. So like if people don't necessarily have questions right away, that's also fine. Do you have some other thoughts maybe on like I think that point too that you brought up, Sean, like the interconnectedness, that point is also important, right? Like how do we see those things as built in together and then identify those important locations? But I see one in here. Yeah, how do we deal with the flood of experienced organizers from red states due to the conditions? I think that's a really good question. I can maybe really briefly start just with some thinking as somebody who moved out for different reasons. But I think one of the things we have to do is we have to like really, as DSA, we have to focus on being in solidarity with each other across the entire organization. Something that I would want to do on the NPC very specifically is like take time to take the experience I've had in Metro DC DSA and put that into trying helping out chapters other places, right? And places that are really important to me. But I think that's something where like we can all learn from each other and we can think about how do we kind of take those lessons and those lessons that are actually a lot more applicable than sometimes they might seam at first and send them back to everywhere in the organization, right? There's things from New York that we can all learn from the Zoran one run, and it doesn't matter, if it's Metro DC, like my chapter, that's a lot more like NYC's, or if it's one, the Houston chapter or the Richmond chapter, right? There's lessons we can all draw from that, and I think the more space we can build for that, the better we as an organization are going to be. I think that's one of those first things, just basic solidarity. Do you have some other thoughts on that? And maybe we can grab one of the other questions after that. Yeah, maybe another one of the questions we could take here from the chat too. Like I'm seeing this. So what should smaller chapters do when there are limited labor union activity in their communities, especially thanks to Right to Work?
I used to volunteer for EWOC, and it's been a great program. And my best advice would be if there's not enough labor union activity, then you should go start some. And I know that's easier said than done. I'm speaking as a public sector teacher in Georgia. We have so many barriers, and half the time our union disagrees about whether or not to even call ourselves a union. It is difficult. It is not easy, and oftentimes you are alone. But I think about the Smithfield plant in southeastern North Carolina. Jane McAlevey wrote about this in one of her books about the 20 plus year effort to organize this 5,000 worker plant that packed meat and made food products. Um, Labor activity happens everywhere. Everyone everywhere has a job somewhere, right? There are working people everywhere you go, and it's difficult, right? It's not easy work, but when you think about it, you're in a smaller chapter, right? You're in a southern chapter, a red state chapter. It's hard to get started anywhere, right? um, doesn't really matter what your option is, right? If you want to build socialism in that area, you're not going to run a city council campaign right off the bat, not without some kind of coalition, right? You can't go win a policy just off the bat, right? All these options that we have are very difficult, but the options are basically, do we not do anything, or do we take on a campaign? In my opinion, the easiest campaigns to win are the ones with the people right around you, right? That's your labor unions, or in some cases, I know a lot of chapters have had success with mutual aid campaigns when they tie into a broader policy goal. I think it's really important not to divert resources to mutual aid campaigns just for the sake of keeping them running. Like there's been some discussion of this around like brake light clinics, for example. Our purpose is not to do brake light clinics so that people rely on us to change their brake lights. Our purpose is to do those clinics so that we can talk to people and explain their issues and ask them about what is affecting them. And then that way we have a list of people we can contact. We have a list of issues people have told us about, and we can build a campaign from that, right? It's more of a, not a pretense, but it is a great way to develop a list of people that you can contact, a list of people that you can kind of start to organize into a base. But really what I would say is probably the most straightforward way is if there's not enough labor union activity, go start some. Get into some good trouble, as a famous Georgian would say.
And I think some of you were saying about mutual aid. Sumter is also like there's a question kind of in that way on the chat too. So if you have some thoughts about how we use that, like like you were saying, it's not just like to do brake lights, but it's something bigger. So do you have some other thoughts on that? I mean, coming from Oklahoma, tornado mutual aid is a huge thing we're very famous for. I know hurricane mutual aid is a huge thing in the South too. But yeah, if maybe some of you have some thoughts on that.
I can add a little bit. So I like what really got me involved in national DSA organizing is eco-socialism. Like I was involved in organizing like local eco-socialist campaigns in the DC chapter. It was on public power, but just from getting in touch with comrades from across the country, we helped build like a nationwide eco-socialist working group, and there was a lot of interest in like I remember in 2019, I think 2018 or 19, like Houston had just been hit by a major hurricane. So a lot of comrades there were doing like a lot of what is being described in the chat, just like a lot of the, like mucking and gutting, just like clearing out homes that had been wrecked by the hurricane. And through like we didn't have a national mutual aid working group yet, which has been built up over the past few years, which is great, like helping share lessons learned from chapters that have active mutual aid. But when we were trying to build up that capacity through eco-socialism, what we really found is that anytime chapters were in a zone hit by a major disaster, or whether it's a hurricane or fires or something, like they would always do the immediate mutual aid, like disaster relief, like that, capacity for that. There's always immediate interest and energy to do that. But what chapters, especially in the Gulf South, like told us was that when that happens, like we'll do the mutual aid stuff, but what we could really use from the national org or any kind of, other bigger chapters that are outside of the disaster zone is help us politicize this. Help us politicize the failure of the state to do anything that the state should be doing. Like FEMA isn't doing shit, or like it's so inaccessible to most people. It's being defunded. Red state governments or like Republicans are defunding it, or Democrats are not fighting for it. So what an org like DSA can do is help politicize that. So, the first year that I was in leadership, like I was really proud that we were able to help coordinate with chapters in Texas after the Texas freeze that happened in early 2021. This was a huge disaster. Like millions of people were out of power, where there was this unseasonable freeze that happened that made the grid shut down. And because other chapters have been doing public power campaigns, we knew a lot about how private utilities work. And we were able to say, like, oh, ERCOT in Texas is the reason, like, it's not just a disaster hit and this is a natural disaster. It's capitalists that are regulating the grid to shut down power and make it inaccessible for millions of working class people that are literally out in the cold right now. So we were able to get that together. So like a lot of so we were able to get together a call very quickly, and get in touch with the comrades we could get in touch with in Texas chapters that were hit by this. And a lot of them were doing mutual aid, like San Antonio DSA, Houston, Austin, were doing a lot on the ground. But people who had power were able to coordinate with us to plug those local mutual aid efforts. But then we also laid out a whole like explanation of like, this is why this is disaster capitalism happening. Like your local capitalists or in a state of millions of people are just using the disaster to get away with like murder. So that's something that we think the national org should be able to do way more, and more regional structure like this could facilitate more. Like I linked this Power for Texas website. It's great that it's still up after years. It had been our intention then 4 years ago to devolve that to Texas chapters. Like, you run with this, you have these resources, but there was no structure for it. So, going forward, like things keep happening like this. Like in North Carolina last year, Asheville, like the western part of the state, was decimated by these massive floods and a hurricane that went up into the mountains, which never happens before. But we just weren't nationally coordinated. A lot happened locally in those chapters. That was great. Like the Asheville chapter, did a lot of on the ground stuff. The NC Triangle chapter, which is the biggest one in North Carolina, did a lot of, like tried to help coordinate. But it just the structure wasn't really set up for those chapters to sustain that, and the national org wasn't connected enough. So this is something that going forward, like Wilmington's on a coastal hurricane zone, like, there's a lot of talk about how to coordinate better across chapters, but it just takes a lot of capacity from volunteers doing it without more support from a national organization. So that's really shaped a lot of how I think about it. Like mutual aid organizing is always going to be something people do, but we need to tackle power at every level of government and build the muscles to really help support what people are doing on the ground.
Yeah, that was really well said. I think we experienced that here in Richmond this last year. We lost water for multiple weeks, twice now, because of our horrific infrastructure. And we were able to coordinate with other local groups. There's so many mutual aid groups, at least in Richmond. Maybe I'm blessed with that, but I mean, so many groups mobilized, from churches to anarchist organizations to just like homeless shelters and things like that. And we were able to actually service a lot of the community with a lot of local focused input. I think when I look at what kind of a wider scope or a high level of power could assist with that. I mean, there is, maybe some monetary support that might go there. But overall, like the biggest impact was, LeVar Stoney, the mayor, who basically knew about the water crisis years ago and did nothing about it, is no longer in politics. And that was because we were able to politicize the failure, and get him unemployed. And so I do think like kind of having like the local and maybe regional sort of coordinate mutual aid is really the effective sort of strategy there, and then just having the broader organization sort of echo or blast out the political ramifications of the disasters that capital creates.
Yeah, thank you all for those really great questions. Thanks to all of you for also sharing all these great answers. But we're 5 minutes over time, so I think we'll wrap just out of respect for everybody's time. And I'm gonna drop in the chat for folks the groundwork resolutions, amendments that we're bringing to convention. So we'd love it if you take a gander at those if you're going to be a delegate. If not, we'd also love it if you look at them and let your chapter delegation know what you think about them. And then a number of us are also running to be on the NPC. So Ashik and Francis are both incumbents. They're running again. Ashik is also running to be one of our co-chairs again. Sumter and I are also running just to be at-large members, and so we'd also appreciate, reach out to us. We'd love to get your vote. We'd love to talk to you too, and we'd also love to know how to support your chapters and organizing across the whole country. It's going to take winning everywhere for us to win socialism, and that's what we want to do as soon as possible. So, cheers, and thanks for your time tonight, folks. Thanks for coming by.
Thanks, everyone. And yeah, definitely feel free to get in touch. It may have already been mentioned, but I think we are the most meaningfully Southern slate for NPC. Like 6 out of 8 of us are, have connections. Like Karis from Louisville, who couldn't make it. Kareem, who's in New York City now, grew up in Virginia. So, we care a lot about building power everywhere. And, DSA doesn't need to keep being this like very coastal concentrated organization. We have members everywhere in between. So yeah, I just dropped a link to a statement I wrote at dsaforall.com/letter. That's about how we become a 50-state organization and build power everywhere. Like we can level up so much over the next few years. So looking forward to organizing with you all.